Morning, people. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you might be in the world today. Again, my name is Mike Keitzer. I'm an instructor here at Sunset Learning Institute, and we've been working recently on developing some content, again, for Cisco, on, in this case, Webex Contact Center. And what we'll talk about this morning is kind of a preview of some of the information we've developed thus far. So welcome to our webinar. Let's get started. Okay, so here's the agenda we're going to try to cover within 1 hour's time. Kip tells me I've got to keep on track here because I've got a lot of slides to cover. This is, of course, the introduction. Welcome to all of you again. And as mentioned, we're going to give you a preview of one of the modules in our upcoming Webex Contact Center Administration course. We'll also talk a little bit more about in this section. And this Webex Contact Center Admin course. It's currently under development. We're working hard on getting this thing going. So this is one of the modules along the way called a tenant profile. A tenant profile, as we'll describe, is basically all the settings that you might have affecting mostly users in the form of agents, supervisors, administrators. So we'll talk about the components of a tenant profile, what it actually is, talk to you about different user types that you're going to see within the Webex Contact Center environment, get into different what we call profile types for users. Talk about skill profiles, user profiles, agent multimedia profiles, talk about skills and skill definitions as well, sites and teams, and then basically wrap it all up with sample demo of some user configurations. What would an agent see versus a supervisor versus maybe an administrator? Talk to you about some of the bulk tools available, including some of the APIs. And I would recommend you all stick around for the very last if you can. We'll give you some cool marketing information that might help out your pocketbook if you decide to attend one of these fine classes in the future, which we hope you do. So let's get started with the components of a tenant profile. We've got some new slides as well that we just got fresh, hot off the presses really last night, this morning from some of our people that are helping out to make the product a little bit cooler. So here's some of the pictures that you'll see along the way. We'll talk about, we've got some customers, we've got scripts and routing strategies. Those are actually a little bit more in the next module. We'll be talking about queues and agents and teams and team members. Got a lot of terms and definitions that we'll describe along the way. One thing I'll mention here initially, just as a term, is this first thing called a tenant profile. Set the story a little bit. By this point in time in the class officially, we would have described things like, what is a tenant? A tenant is your deployment of Webex Contact Center, or the customer's deployment. What's a tenant profile? It's a term we're using to wrap up a whole bunch of things. It's not one thing. It's all of the agents and skills and profiles and sites and teams that we see as a collection of the configuration. In this particular case, we're talking initially here about dialed numbers coming in as inbound calls to the contact center, and ultimately referencing these things called entry points and queues and sites and teams. This is part of our discussion this morning. We'll try to fill you in on what all of these terms mean, definitions, and how this applies to the Webex environment. So here's a picture, again, kind of hot off the press. We don't have a lot of background on this slide yet. Still a work in progress, but this is a picture that you'll see throughout the course. If you come to our admin course, starts off on the left-hand side with, of course, a customer making a phone call inbound to the contact center. We, of course, in the admin course, we'll talk not only about voice contacts, we'll talk about email and chat, multimedia, other operations. But over on the right-hand side is the focus of this module. All of the components that exist within this thing called a site and a team, agents, and all of the profiles associated with agents or supervisors or users. That's the concept here, what we're going to talk about with this thing called a tenant profile. So we'll break those components down individually. Big picture wise, what the goal is when a customer calls in to Webex Contact Center, they encounter this thing called an entry point. That's basically a way into the system, and via some flow logic, we ultimately are trying to point to a queue. A queue, as we'll talk about, placeholder for calls that ultimately are trying to get routed to agents of different types. These might be sales or support agents or whatnot. This thing called a tenant hierarchy is not, again, just one thing. It's a combination of all of the things within your Webex Contact Center environment. This is a kind of a screenshot from legacy information here, but we can see the Acme tenant in the middle here has multiple sites. They're actually physically located in different places, might be logically located in different places, but all these things called teams and queues, all topics of discussion within the confines of this course this morning. Another picture you're going to see along the way here is a little bit drilling down into sites and teams and user profiles and skill profiles, multimedia profiles, etc. So more topics of discussion that we'll get into. Okay, that being said, a little bit of background here. If you've not done a lot of work within the Webex Contact Center environment, one of the things we would also talk about within this course is to try to get you situated a little bit with exactly where I'm logging in to do different things. One of the things that you're looking at on this screen is actually what we call the Contact Center Management Portal. This is where we actually go to provision all kinds of things that we're talking about this morning in this discussion, like sites and teams and users and user profiles. So this provisioning aspect in the contact center, second option down on this screen, is basically the focus of the discussion of today. So there you go. Okay, people, let's go back to what we're calling here tenant profiles. And let's talk about some different user types that we see within the contact center environment. Most commonly, here's one screen that we're kind of in process of working on. What we're trying to establish is a little bit of a heads up for you is, you'd think that maybe with this cloud-based solution, I just log into one web page, right? And I do everything from one web page. Pretty sure that's probably where it's headed. Right now, not so much true. We've actually got logins to Webex itself, to what we call the Control Hub within Webex. That's for just doing Webex-ish stuff. You might be using Webex calling or video or Webex Teams or something of that nature. If you want to do Webex Contact Center, that's actually a different portal, if you will, a different logon. That's really what we're trying to describe here. Things like agents as well, right? Agents have their own somewhat unique logon that they can go to directly without doing a bunch of navigation here, there, and everywhere. So this is a slide that's a little bit in progress that we're currently working on, just to display all the different login points that you might actually see currently within the Webex environment. So as a user, what we're describing here is a user within at least the Webex Contact Center environment, several different traditional types of roles that we're going to see. Agents, of course, agents take calls, emails, chat, whatnot. Supervisors, of course, historically manage agents, might take calls, might take emails, whatever, might not. Administrators / managers, other users of the contact center may or may not take calls, maybe some testing, right? As an administrator, I'd certainly want to have an ability to maybe log in as an agent to do some testing, but wouldn't normally be taking calls. So these agents, supervisors, other types of users in the contact center environment, what we're seeing here is actually a display not in the Webex Contact Center environment, but really in the Webex Control Hub, where we see a combination of a couple of things. Number one is roles that we have for users. You notice within the contact center, we've got different types of roles: agents, supervisors, administrators. We see in regard to premium agents or standard agents. And we've also got licenses, right? We're actually taking a look here at licenses within the contact center. I think on hopefully the next screen, we'll actually see we not only have licenses, we also have administrator roles within the organization that we see within Webex Control Hub. So these roles that we see in the Control Hub, the licenses that we see for contact center operations, are ultimately going to drive what types of users we see within the Webex Contact Center environment that we'll show you here in a second. It's used to be that you kind of had an ability within the contact center to put in users directly to the contact center. That's really not true anymore. All of the users start as users within the Control Hub. They show up based on your roles, permissions, or administrative rights within the organization over here. So we'll show you that. We're taking a look now actually at a user that has been defined as a user within the Control Hub. They've been given contact center licenses, maybe an administrator, maybe a supervisor. In this case, this user's been assigned the role of an administrator. We can tell that, if nothing else, by their username. And what we see now over in the Webex Contact Center Portal is we can see this user has automatically been basically imported into the contact center environment. Some information is carried forth from the Control Hub, including this thing called a user profile. We notice here that this user profile is assigned, and we've got another slider button down below that says Contact Center Enabled. So what we're going to describe here to you in a second is what is a user profile exactly, and if we enable this contact center functionality, what are these things called? Sites, teams, skill profiles, agent profiles, and multimedia profiles. So far we've talked about users coming from the Control Hub as contact center types of users, either agents, supervisors, or some form of administrative functionality. And when we get those users imported into the contact center environment, we've got some additional fields that we need to think about for how exactly those impact things. So people, we last left here talking about tenant profiles. One of the things we saw with tenant profiles is users come really within the contact center from the Webex Control Hub based on their rights and roles. And the next section here, little section on profile types for users. We were a little bit picky with that term. We didn't call it user profiles because there's actually a configuration object called user profile. So here we're describing different profile types for users. So this section is going to get into all of these things that we just looked at: agent profiles, skill profiles, multimedia profiles, user profiles, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what we're going to talk about. And that goes hand in hand with those terms and definitions. So user profiles, basically your rights within the contact center itself. Agent profile, kind of agentish rights. Skills, definitions, and profiles we'll talk about. Those are historically your skills that you inherit. And multimedia profile, we'll get into that as well. That allows you to take more than one type of media. So first off, user profiles. Let's take a look at user profiles. By default, I'm looking here within the Webex Contact Center Portal. I'm under the provisioning tab, and I'm looking at user profiles in this particular case. And one of the things I notice is there's 5 default user profiles that are built into the system. Looks like a couple of them are administrator-based user profiles. Some of them are agent-based profiles, and there looks like there's a supervisor profile. Remember licensing, we've got premium and standard behavior over there within the Webex Contact Center environment. So we notice those are profiles built in by default. What are they? It looks like these profiles apply to all users, regardless of whether you're an agent or not. And remember that these roles that we see here are under user profiles effectively, which was what they are, tied again back to your licenses and the roles that you've actually assigned back in the Webex Control Hub. So if you created somebody and flagged them as an administrator over in the Control Hub, when they show up over here with user profiles, one of the things you're going to see is that they inherit basically the profile type of the type of user that you created over there within the Control Hub. This is a little bit different behavior from some of the legacy Webex Contact Center stuff back in the CJP days that some of you might have hung out with me during. So slightly different behavior. Now your users in the contact center really tied tightly or directly to things that you've configured within the Control Hub. We also, I think, point out to you here somewhere along the way that within your user profile, you could actually create new user profiles if you want to, but when you assign somebody a user profile, their rights have to be equal to or less than whatever their capabilities are out there. So my example, I could create a new administrative user profile if I want to, which basically, as you'll see here in a second, defines what access I have on the system. When I go to change that on a per user basis, I'm kind of locked into the type of profile that I'm configured based on that user. And that is to say, I can't assign an agent a user profile that's an administrator. It doesn't work that way unless I go into the Control Hub and flag that person as some kind of administrative function. So here's just some general settings on the user profile. The module settings basically reveal that a user profile, what is it? It's basically what access do you have to all of the modules within the Webex Contact Center. We see that we've got different options for provisioning, reporting, agent desktop functionality, routing strategies, which is basically all your call flows and scripting, call monitoring and recording. And if you look closely at these module settings, this is really what we're granting access to with this thing called a user profile. A user profile, what kind of permissions do I actually have within the greater contact center when I log in there? And when I get to some section that I have access to, do I have just an ability to view objects, or can I actually edit those objects as well? So Julie Poole, good morning, Julie. I see your question out there. Yes, in fact, that was probably me teaching that course years ago. I've been doing this for, I think, 59 years now. So there you have it. I'm 83, but I look much younger. So, okay, access rights is the last tab we're looking at here. And basically with access rights, you also maybe as an administrator might not have access to all of the entry points or all the queues or sites or teams and or reports that you can see. So again, good wrap up for user profiles. Basically, all of the rights and roles that you have when you log in as that type of user to the contact center environment. What can you see and what can you do? Next section here is on agent profiles. Agent profiles, a little bit different than user profiles, but similarly related. Agent profiles are basically your agent behavior as an agent person taking a phone call or email or a chat. I would liken this over in the contact center enterprise world to something that we would call agent desk settings. Basically, your what kinds of things happen over there. You can see in the middle of the screen when you create an agent profile or look at an agent profile, there's actually multiple tabs to look at. You've got aux codes and collaboration and a dial plan, some agent DN stuff, agent thresholds. Let's take a quick look at some of these things with agent profiles. So general information, we can see some stuff with an agent profile. There's several built in by default. We're going to allow screen pops, last agent routing, auto answer. These all seem like agent desk setting options. Aux codes, right? Do I have to go into after call work or wrap up, et cetera, et cetera. Collaboration. Do I get to see or view or deal with, permit all entry points and queues for things like agent transfers. This thing called buddy teams allows you to have buddy teams, other people you can consult with within the contact center environment. A dial plan. Do I need to restrict what kind of a dial plan I've got? We've got basically a dial plan that we could have with any format, or of course the US dial plan. All of this stuff as well is regionalized within the Webex environment as well. So again, if you're somewhere not in the US world, your mileage might vary a little bit right here. Just point that out to you. Agent DN validation. Again, we're still looking at user or agent profiles, a lot of information here, but when an agent logs in, one of the things they have to put in is what phone number are we going to reach you at if you're a voice agent, and what team are you a member of. So when you log in as an agent and you put in a phone number, do we care what phone number you put in? We could actually lock that down here if we wanted to, or in this case, allow some kind of unrestricted value for your phone number you're using. Agent statistics. When you log into the contact center as an agent, you get a lot of statistics that show up in the form of basically reports. So what kind of statistics can you see here? You can, of course, lock that down a little bit within this thing called an agent profile. And same thing with agent thresholds, right? There's different thresholds that we can see and have alerts pop up or not. So these agent profiles, a bunch of settings that affect agent functionality, as you might imagine, if nothing else, based on simply the term itself. So talked so far about user profiles. What rights do you have globally on the system? Agent profiles, which would only be a setting if you're contact center enabled. What kind of rights and abilities do you have as an agent to do different things? After call, work, wrap up, aux codes. Next topic of discussion here is skill definitions and skill profiles, highlighted in the bottom left-hand side of this picture. So skill definitions are basically your skills within the contact center. Skill profiles are a combination of those skill definitions that we can inherit as some kind of an agent along the way out there. No default skill definitions. You have to add these as required. When you add a skill definition here, we've added a skill definition, whether or not you're certified to grow dental floss, it looks like. And it looks like we've got service level thresholds, so some reporting obligations here within a particular skill definition. Now we've got different types of skill definitions here within the Webex Contact Center environment. We're pretty used to, if we're coming from traditional Cisco stuff, having maybe Boolean as well as some kind of proficiency-based skills. We'll take a look at some text as well as enumerated value skills as well here in 1 second. So proficiency is on a scale, in this case, of 0 to 10. Boolean, of course, is a yes or no condition, true or false condition for a skill definition. Text is literally matching a string of text. And enumerated value, as you'll see here in a second, I believe, is really just a enumerated list or choice of skills. So I've got a couple of skills listed here in the form of skill profiles on the screen. One is whether or not I'm certified. That's, of course, in this case, I made that a Boolean skill type. Looks like the default value I would inherit is a true. Claims, I've made that a proficiency skill. We get by default maybe a 7 would be assigned to somebody. And I've got another skill here called insurance type. That's created as a skill type of enumerated value. And you can see what I get there is just basically a pick list of the different skills.
Mike, we just did have a question come in that might be relevant.
Okay.
Can you go back one slide, I believe? The question relates to the service level threshold.
Okay.
Could you address that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, well, I certainly can. We're going to see actually service level threshold pop up across a bunch of different objects. And remember, what a service level threshold is basically your obligation of how am I doing? Am I taking calls in a timely fashion for this specific skill or this team or an entry point? So many objects within the contact center environment that we discussed here along the way are going to have some kind of a service level threshold show up. This is simply a reporting metric tool, a threshold, a line in the sand, if you will, that allows us to do some post-reporting on exactly how we're doing with ability to grow dental floss. So if we get ultimately a call routed to an agent that's a member of some team that this skill is considering or is being considered by the skill, this would be yet another tool that we could use for reporting on how we're doing. Hopefully that answers that question. Yeah, you good with that answer from me? So reporting.
Good enough. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so skill profiles are a combination of your skills. Remember that we talked about two things here. We talked about skill definition. So when we create a skill, we're really creating a skill definition, right? Now I've got a service level threshold on how I'm doing with growing dental floss. And I've got a skill profile. A skill profile is a collection of one or more of those skill definitions. And what we'll see here is that a skill profile, again, could be assigned to an agent, or if you have to talk about teams, an agent-based team. So that's kind of cool. That's different behavior. I don't have to actually assign my skills to a person, to an agent. I can assign my skills to a team. You don't see this yet, but when, again, you log into the contact center as an agent, what do you got to put in there? You got to put in your phone number, where you're getting phone calls to. You also have to pick a team. So if you log into Team A might be certified to grow dental floss and take auto and RV claims. Right? If you log into Team B, they might take, life insurance questions or types of issues. So that's kind of different cool behavior within this WebEx environment. Multimedia profile is the next topic of discussion here. A multimedia profile is what it sounds like it is. It's what types of different media can I take as, in this particular case, an agent. So got a multimedia profile built by default called the default telephony profile you see on the screen. The default telephony profile just allows you to take one type of a voice call. No email, no social channel types of media, no chat. That's cool. If you want to create another multimedia profile, you certainly can. Here we've got at the bottom of the page a multimedia profile called digital channel enabled. And when we create multimedia profiles that have more than just voice enabled, we get a couple of options these days. We can have blended multimedia profiles. We could have blended real time. Could also have exclusive as options. So Voice, of course, we're limited to one type of a contact. You can only really talk to one person at a time. Last I checked on a phone, unless you have a conference call, I suppose. Chat, email, social channel, top number here is 5. You can see I've created one that's allows 2 chats and 5 emails, 3 social channels. Now, again, chat more of a real-time conversation as well, certainly more real-time than email. So it might be some considerations here with what you do. And blended versus blended real-time, you notice the difference is blended, you can take multiple types of contacts simultaneously. Blended real-time, you're kind of saying, well, I can only do one real-time channel at a time, either voice or chat. So some different options you have here within the contact center environment. Let's see here. Looks like there's some questions I can see, that I found that Q&A thing.
Yeah, actually, we do have a question around profiles from Bill. Has to do with, it looks like some are on a personal basis and some are more on a group basis. Is there a point where you might be able to go into detail, or we could hold that one to the end?
Let me think about this question. Good morning, Bill. We've known Bill forever and 2 days, I believe. Agent profiles on individual name basis or more for groups, types of agents. Sounds like some profiles are per person, others assigned to groups of people like agent desk settings. Yeah, so I think I can answer that maybe as a recap or as a wrapper to all this stuff here, which probably kind of a good point to do that right now because we're getting into sites and teams, which, by the way, are going to really help to answer some of Bill's questions. What Bill's questions really are, or if I go back to maybe this picture right here, I've got some different types of profiles we discussed. Should these be assigned to users or what's the deal? Well, let me try to answer that with a little bit of pen scribbling here. So first off, remember that all users that come into the Webex Contact Center environment really came via the Control Hub. And that's just really a Webex thing. Okay, that's not the contact center. So your users that you got pulled over here by default come as originated users in the Control Hub. And all the users in the Control Hub have this thing called a user profile. Now that has to be assigned really on a per user basis. We can't do that on a per team basis or anything. It's strictly on a per user basis. Okay, and that makes a little bit of sense. We're either an administrator or an agent or a supervisor. Supervisors, by the way, have some default, pretty crazy rights and permissions to do some, what I would call administrative things over there within the contact center. So that's cool. So remember your user profiles, what rights do you have within the system? If you enable somebody for a contact center functionality, like an agent or a supervisor, those people also have to inherit agent profiles. And your agent profiles, I would say that wouldn't be probably based on maybe a per user basis. I would say that would be more, global. What do we need? That was all of my aux codes and, reasons and buddy zones and things of that nature. So that's a bit more generic, unless you've got the, the little blue-haired lady in the contact center. He or she may need some kind of special agent profile, but probably more generic. Skill profiles, remember, are just a combination of your skills. What we'll see here is that skill profiles could be associated with users, agents in this particular case, or, as you'll see upcoming in a second, those could also just simply be associated, in this case, to a team. That's kind of a cool feature, I thought, within the Webex Contact Center environment, right? Assign your skills to a team. When you log in as an agent, you got to pick a team, so your team allows you to basically inherit your settings. Multimedia profile as well. We'll see that has some functionality that we can have described on a per user basis or really on a per team basis. We should see that here upcoming really in this next set of discussions. So pretty doggone good question is what I would say that is. Hopefully, Bill, that helped to answer that question. Let's take a look at sites and teams, and maybe that will make a bit more sense. So we see in this particular picture here, we got this thing called a site. What the heck is that? We've got a team. What is that? It looks like teams or what agents belong to. And that would be a true statement. So let's take a closer look at what's going on with sites and teams. Site, as we point out here, physical or logical collection of teams. And what's a team? It's a collection of agents. We'll get into more detail about that here in 1 second. So here we're provisioning within, again, the Webex Contact Center Portal under the provisioning location, this thing called a site. There is, I think by default, one site 1 that's on the system when it first gets set up. You can create, of course, your own sites. What is the site? Well, I guess sounds like it would be a physical location, Chicago or Bangalore or Denver or whatnot. Fair enough, could certainly be that physical location. Could really just be a logical site. A site at the end of the day is simply a collection of teams. What's a team? It's something as you're going to see an agent logs into. So it doesn't have to be necessarily physically located somewhere. Here I've got a branch 99 site that could be my own little small contact center. Could be one of the departments that's utilizing this contact center functionality. So your mileage might vary here. We notice that when we create a site, one of the things that we can associate with a site is this thing called a multimedia profile. So that's kind of interesting. Now, this site over here can take emails and chats as well as voice calls, but this site over here, they're only maybe doing emails and chats, maybe no voice, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all pretty interesting stuff. Sites are also reportable objects. You'll see that there's some different reports that come up along the way, of course, agents and skills and whatnot, but sites are also a reportable object. Team, I believe, is the next discussion. So what the heck is a team? A team is a functional collection of agents and profiles that get inherited with the team and are associated with a site when you create these teams. A team itself within the contact center environment, you're going to see here, is either agent-based, so a listing of agents that are on this team, or capacity-based. We'll talk more about capacity-based teams here in 1 second. A capacity team is automatically created when you create each new site. So I created a new site called the Branch 99 site. Notice it created a team here called T4. Now, I don't know about the naming of T4. That's just a random value it throws out there. You create another site, creates another team called T5. But notice all of these teams out here so far are these things called capacity-based teams. So what's up with a capacity-based team? Capacity team are site-based, as we just pointed out, but have no listed agents per se. What a capacity team allows you to do is, best maybe case example here is some kind of an offsite outsourcing. You've got an outsourcer that you've got an agreement with that says, hey, we will take 10 of your calls as overflow from your regular contact center environment. Awesome. That sounds exactly what we want in the form of a capacity-based team. You'll notice that when we configure or have a capacity team, what we've got is the dial number that's used to actually reach that outsourced team itself. So in this case, 8675309 gets us there. And capacity is exactly how many calls are we going to have an ability to basically throw across the fence to that outsourced vendor, or maybe third-party ACD or whatever it happens to be. So this is just one of the features. You don't have to use capacity-based teams, but you could within the Webex environment. You might be more interested in, of course, just using agent teams. Now, when you create a site, it does not create an agent team for you. You'd have to actually create this agent team. Here I've got a Branch 99 site. I'm creating a new team called the Branch 99 Collections Team. Notice we can use spaces here in our naming convention. I've declared this an agent-based team, and what I put in here, instead of having a dial number to reach the capacity team and what capacity it is, now what's enabled for me is different settings that we can see that kind of goes hand in hand with Bill's question. I can, on a per team basis, associate a skill profile. I can, on a per team basis, associate a multimedia profile and a desktop layout. We haven't talked about that here yet. Notice that I have an ability from here to pick agents, or I go to agents and assign them to, in this particular case, a team. So skill profiles, multimedia profiles, looks like they can be assigned on either a team basis or an agent basis. Of course, agent settings would be overriding any kind of team settings. So the more specific you get down to a person or an agent themselves, those settings would override team settings, by example. The thing we just looked at was this thing called a desktop layout.
Mike, we had a quick question. Is
Yep,
there
yep.
a limit to the number of participants in a team?
Is there a limit to the number of participants, agents on a team? I'm going to have to say I don't know that answer off the top of my head. Somebody out there might. I'd be hard pressed to tell you a number, but there probably is somewhere some kind of a magical number. What that is, I'm not sure. So we'll mark that down, Kip, as a good question that we'll include in our real class. How's that sound?
Okay, good enough.
I'm trying to think about, is there any kind of a report that I could see that would tell me if I'm about to exceed that number or something? I don't know. So that's a fine question I don't know the answer to. There you go. Desktop layout would be something that we'll actually demo for you towards the end of this discussion here. But the default desktop layout, as you might imagine, pretty plain. And this is the agent desktop layout. You might want to, by example, add your own corporate logo and maybe add your own different colors in there, make them sunset blue and orange colors or whatnot. So desktop layout is a little bit of adventure in modifying a JSON file and uploading your new desktop layout. This is all very well documented in the online help information for how to modify that desktop layout. If you've done something similar over there, maybe within just Contact Center Enterprise or Express with other desktop layouts, this is not much different. So here we've got a new desktop layout called the Sunset Desktop Layout, which looks like we can assign on a per team basis if we want to. So this team gets one desktop layout for sales versus a different desktop layout for support. We also have an ability to provision global variables. I won't talk too much about that here. There's a bunch of different variables that are built into the system. We can have up to 100 variables for reporting. We've got some limits within flows for how many variables we can see. I think that's 30, but variable information would show up more in our module called the routing strategy module. You're not going to see that today, but that would be the module that follows up this provisioning of all of our users and sites and teams module. Okay, we're getting close here to being able to wrap up there, Kip, so I think we're doing fine time-wise. Yep. We're going to add some contact center users here in our next section, and we're going to see how all this stuff actually plays together. So we're back again, as we described to you, in just the control hub, adding some users. Looks like we've added a supervisor user, an agent user, and some kind of an admin user. You'll notice again what we can see, a little fine print on the right-hand side, some of the admin roles. You notice that only the administrator has been given admin rights within the contact center. These other users, though, certainly have been given licensed permissions to use the contact center in the form of agents and or supervisors. In the control hub itself, we've got a couple of ways to add users. We can actually manually add users one by one. We can use some CSV, typical bulk import for users. We've got, of course, API functionality we can use. We can go out and claim users. We can enable LDAP and directory synchronization. So we've got a lot of different options we'll talk about. As we mentioned, we're trying to add 3 different user types: an administrator, some kind of agent, and a supervisor we're seeing here. So we've added all those in via basically the manual add method, putting in usernames and email addresses. Interestingly enough, when you put in a user these days, you give them first name, last name, email address, you hit go. That's about all you have to do. You don't type in any kind of password. You don't have to tell them their password is Cisco and please change it. You basically, as a user that's being added to the system, get an invite in the form of an email that gets sent to you. And if you accept that email as a user, then you have to go in there and type in your password. So that's kind of a cool feature. Everything, by the way, people here in this new world tied to your email address. So you work across multiple systems, you might need to have a couple of email addresses. As we again described to you along the way, several types of roles. So here we're editing our licenses for the contact center. We're giving this user an agent role or a supervisor role, or again, if we've also made them an administrator, we see that as well. So here's an administrator for our users. We described that a little bit to you. And what we see now is that we are launching the Webex Contact Center Management Portal. So we were in the Control Hub, baseline Webex Control Hub. Now we're in the Contact Center Management Portal. There's a shortcut for that. And what we see basically is our users just have now magically shown up. They don't have any kind of contact center functionality yet enabled, but notice they automatically have inherited a user profile based on, again, the roles and rights that we gave them over there within the Webex Control Hub itself. So our agent got and signed an agent user profile, supervisor gets a supervisor user profile, administrative user gets an admin profile. And that happened automatically for us based on, again, roles, licenses, permissions. We can again change things like your user profile to something equal or lesser than whatever profile you've inherited, not anything greater. So again, even though you can create your own user profiles, a little bit locked down for what you can actually do, tied now very tightly with basically licenses and functionality within the control. And the bottom slider down below, contact center enabled. At some point in time, you'll ponder, do I need to check this or not? Obviously, agents, the answer would be yes. Supervisors, yes. But for some administrative people, right, what's the answer there? Well, A, you're going to be starting to consume a license if the answer is yes. And B, maybe important to remember people that work in the contact center versus people who work on the contact center. If you work in the contact center, taking phone calls and talking to customers, you most definitely want to be contact center enabled. If you work on the contact center, maybe you're just running reports. You don't need to be contact center enabled to run reports because that would be something inherited via whatever user profile you have, right? You need to get to the reporting section. Well, if so, cool, we'll give you access to that. If you're not going to log in as an agent, that would be a different thing. So if you need agent desktop functionality or not, that's that contact center enabled slider feature. Notice that for people like agents and supervisors, we enable that to yes. We can associate this person to a site. Be a little bit careful here. Make sure you pick the right site. The one thing you cannot change after the fact with a user is what site they belong to. So you have to delete that user and basically recreate them. I can associate them to teams that are on or associated with that site. I could associate a skill profile, an agent profile, and a multimedia profile here. I don't have to associate skill profiles or multimedia profiles to these agents because those are things I could actually inherit as a team. Okay, so that's cool. Remember things we talked about, skill profiles, those are your skills, teams, what teams are you on, agent profile, what are your behavioral settings within the agent desktop itself, and multimedia profile, can you take more than just voice calls? Verifying functionality. It looks like what we've done now is we've logged on as an administrator. Okay, if we logged on as an administrator profile on the right-hand side, looks like, you don't know this, but we have access to all of our modules. And why is that? Because we're an administrator. If we logged on maybe as a user that's got a supervisor limited user profile, we only gave those people access to a couple of the modules within the contact center. Notice what they see when they log into the Webex Contact Center Management Portal is just a more brief list of exactly what we can see in there based on, again, the user profiles we've associated. Notice this thing here called desktop. That's actually the agent desktop that we can use. All those users have. Agent desktop itself, here we can see when we log on as an agent, I have to, again, as we threatened you with before, supply things like my phone number that I'm going to be getting phone calls at, and what team do I want to log on to. Okay, that's pretty cool. Log on here to the Sunset team. It looks like what I can see for my user account now. If I look at the properties on the right-hand side of this agent desktop, I can see things like what my channel capacity is, right? How many voice, chat, email, social types can I see? I can also see what my phone number is, what my team is. I could change my team if I needed to. And what we're showing you down below is verification of the agent desktop that we've modified. Here's the default desktop out of the box. We did some fancy modification, fairly easily modifying that JSON file And now we notice that we get a new customized desktop with our own corporate logo, et cetera, et cetera. So simply confirmation that all of our work that we did is in fact working correctly. Agents and supervisors, when they log into the portal, they see different stuff, as well as administrators. We also see inherited functionality within the agent desktop itself. All right, so
we've got about 8 minutes.
Okay, perfect. We can do this. Bulk tools. A couple bulk tools help you to automate your tasks here within creation of agents. So let's take a look at a couple of those bulk tools. Again, when you add different types of users in the Control Hub, got some different options here that we could actually incorporate some LDAP type stuff. If we install our directory connector, we could of course import users in bulk. There's basically a CSV file that you download. If you've ever imported other users with a CSV file, this is really no different. We can also go out and claim users. If you've got a user out there, maybe associated somewhere along the way with Webex, but not part of your organization, you can kind of go out there and claim those users. We had some users at Sunset Learning who had signed up for some Webex things, but weren't part of our Control Hub. So we saw those as people we could go out there and claim. If you had a personal email account somewhere, you could type that in there and go out there and claim that user. Remember, as a user with an email account, you only belong to one Webex tenant organization or another, not multiple. So your email address is the key aspect thing. There are some bulk operations for just the contact center. Previous tasks we just talked about were just ways to get users within to the Webex Control Hub. Within the contact center functionality within the Control Hub, there is also some bulk operations where we could bulk configure using a CSV file, things like sites and teams and users, etc. So export the sample CSV file, fill it all out, import it, off you go. Again, different options. Last but not least, maybe best way to end this whole discussion is, of course, APIs. Our intention with our class is to get, of course, more in detail with APIs and actually have you working on some stuff right now. Brief mention to you. Couple of ways to use your application programming interface. Couple of great resources you want to be checking out if you're not already. Number one is the developer portal. Developer portal, developer.webex-cx.com. That's also regionalized, I believe. If you go visit the developer portal, get you started with all the APIs that are available out there that you can use for configuring things like agents and queues and whatnot. Also have sample code, demonstrations, support, got a try it out feature. So if you want to try out an API, you're actually logged in there as your Webex Contact Center administrative user. You can actually do stuff, live demonstration right against your deployment. Got some GitHub resources. GitHub resources also has some sample APIs, got a lot of, as I claim them, computer geeks out there waiting to help you out. And, last but not least, you get strong with your API knowledge and background or not, consider joining the support community for API stuff. So a lot of good resources out there. This came right from Cisco presentations not too long ago, so hopefully that helps you out. People, I think that's the end of my dialogue here on Module 2, which was a discussion about tenant profiles. That's basically all the users and all the collections of things that you can have associated with those accounts, including sites and teams within the contact center environment. We would encourage you to say, hey, that's just a partial snippet of your journey within the Webex Contact Center environment. As we mentioned, we are in the process of creating this new admin course called AWXCC. That course will be out somewhere in Q3. We're trying to figure out exactly what date that will be at some point in time. But since you all stuck around, if you use the promo code 20AWXCC when you sign up for that course, looks like we're going to give you 20% off enrollment. So we would encourage you to use that. Thank you for hanging out for this information. It looks like the code expires sometime later on this year. Can't be used with other discounts, so just be aware of that. But thanks for hanging out with us. One more marketing tidbit you'd want to know about our next on-demand system. If you've not heard too much about that, get a hold of some salespeople, marketing people. Basically, what Next on Demand gives you access to is our digital course library. If you've taken some kind of contact center, express, enterprise course along the way, more than likely we've recorded that, or at least the topics associated with that. So if you need more help on some individual piece, this is kind of a self-paced learning option. Gets you access for a whole year, access to our digital course library, tech talk webinars that you see here, as well as others, discussion boards, short studies. Right? We basically try to help you build a learning path and a learning plan on your own basis for exactly what you can use. So good discount for that. Usually about $2,000. Today it's only $1,000. I'm not sure if it's good just for today. Probably not. But if you use the code NEXT1K, it'll help you out here. So I always tell people, hey, when you're signing up for class, talk to those salespeople. Right? See if you can get some kind of a discount. You probably can somewhere. You didn't hear me say that, but there you go.
Okay, Mike, yeah, just got a couple of quick questions. Let's, you know, the recordings will be available through the Tech Talk portal, you know, sunsetlearning.com. Also, just a couple of quick questions. The recording's already taken care of. So we had effectively two questions that didn't get answered. The first is simply a question from Saeed. Is there a significant difference between the Webex Contact Center cloud-based version and the Webex Contact Center Enterprise? Significant difference?
Okay, that's $1 million question, really, Saeed. Keep this in mind. You got Webex, which is a whole bunch of things, right? And you got Webex Contact Center. Webex Contact Center is what we've seen here. It's the former BroadSoft, BroadCloud, BroadWorks, CJP inherited solution overall. And then separate from that, you've got this thing called Webex Contact Center Enterprise, right? Now, Webex Contact Center Enterprise, yes, more along the lines of a hosted UCCE deployment, slightly modified by one of the partners out there. So that's a lot more traditional look and feel of what we'd see in the form of UCCE, if you will. Not really anything to do with what we described today, just being Webex Contact Center. So you got Webex Contact Center, what we described today. You also have Webex Contact Center Enterprise, which, yes, is really a more of a hosted version, HCS version of CCE in its underlying configuration. It's also got a front end that makes it look a little bit different and all that good stuff. But if you actually peel back the layers of all that stuff, you go, oh, hey, there's a router and a logger and PGs and whatnot for Webex Contact Center Enterprise. Webex Contact Center, none of that stuff, right? Not related to Contact Center Express or UCCE really in any way, shape, or form. Looks more like what we had when we got CJP, Customer Journey Portfolio, I believe is what it was called when I started out with that. So hopefully that helps answer that question. An awesome question.
Okay, one last one here. There's a couple of other things that are now showing up in the chat, but are there any solutions like WFO or WFM available in the UCCX cloud solution?
There surely is a workforce optimization, workforce management. Those would really be plugins with other well-known and used vendors along the way. So let's say natively built in, not in the form of what you're looking for, but yes, with other, we'll call it resources and probably some money involved along the way and licensing and whatnot. WFO and WFM certainly can be included. Right. I know that because we used to teach that with CJP and it was always a kind of a struggle. So Ed's other question kind of follow up with that. It said, would it make sense to learn UCCE? Would that help with Webex Contact Center Enterprise? I would say yes. Remember, Webex Contact Center Enterprise kind of its own little beast. It doesn't really have the same administrative interface as UCCE does, but on the back end, if you actually had to support and maintain that, there would be some benefit with that. I guess that's all I'll say about that.
Okay, well, great. Mike, thanks very much. We're right basically at the bottom of the hour. Good job. And thank you for all the participants for submitting questions. Hopefully we've gotten that. There will be access to the recording from the Tech Talk, just like they're all for others. And again, it is in our digital course library on Next. So thank you again for your attendance. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And Mike, thank you very much for the excellent presentation.
Well, thank you very much, and nice to see all of you out there, at least if it was virtual, right? Got some old school names that showed up, so we appreciate that. New names as well. We look forward to you coming to class and seeing you in the future. So thanks for attending, everybody. We'll see you next time.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.